And good morning to all of you here in the room, as well as everyone who's joining us online in this time. It's so good that we get to share this time together. And I'm really excited about this brand new series that we're launching together today. Now, my wife, Zoe, and I, we've been married for nearly 10 years. And then when combined with the years of dating and being engaged, it means we've been together for nearly 13. But one of the things that I often find myself, again, beginning to realize, and then I forget, and then I need to learn it again, is that no matter how well I think I know Zoe, I often find myself making assumptions about what Zoe might think or might like, assumptions that aren't always accurate or completely true. I wonder, have you ever found yourself caught out by an assumption that you've made? It needs to be said, in my case, 99 times out of 100, the mistake is on me. About 3 years into our marriage, I was in a conversation with Zoe, along with a couple of mates of ours. And one of them asked out of the blue, asked Zoe, when was the last time that I had bought her flowers? Which is just a really jerk question to ask, if you ask me. And before Zoe had even had a chance to respond, I jumped in and said very confidently and honestly, "Oh, Zoe doesn't like flowers." And I said that with zero defensiveness. I was honestly certain that what I said was true. I was convinced that Zoe didn't like flowers, and somewhere along the line, I'd gotten into this sort of thinking that she would much prefer something like chocolate, or maybe like a present that doesn't have an expiry date. Like flowers are dead things that continue to die, and they eventually shrivel up, and you have to throw them into the compost bin. And Zoe wouldn't like that, would she? Now, after I'd so helpfully answered on Zoe's behalf, she very calmly but pointedly said, "What are you talking about, Mike? I love flowers." And then there was just this unnerving silence from our mates who were there looking at me thinking, "Well, this is pretty awkward for you, isn't it, Mike?" Now, that entire moment, that happened because of an assumption, a really innocent assumption that I'd made about Zoe. More importantly, what Zoe likes and what moves her heart. And yet, because that assumption that I made wasn't accurate in the slightest, then my attitudes and my actions when it came to showing love or appreciation to Zoe, that was just out of alignment with what actually moves her heart. Now, fortunately, Zoe is incredibly gracious and patient when it comes to clarifying these assumptions that I have a tendency to make. And yet, I think that my mistake actually reveals a tendency that any one of us can drift into from time to time. It's a tendency where we allow our assumptions or our perceptions of someone or something to determine our attitudes and actions, regardless of whether that assumption is on the money or not. And we can do this in relation to people, and we can also do this in relation to God. There's this thought-provoking line from a guy called A.W. Tozer. We've heard it a few times here at Syndal over the years. And he once said that what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And Tozer goes on to explain how the picture that we have of God has such a significant bearing on the types of people that we become and continue to become. Because it influences the way that we view ourselves. And it shapes the way in which we relate to God and to others. And the implications of this, they extend even further to the way in which a society or a culture functions as a whole. And so if someone's perception of God is that God is distant or disinterested with our world and in our life, then that will shape the attitudes and actions that people have about themselves and about others. Or if someone's perception is that God is only angry or harsh or condemning to those kinds of people, then their attitudes and actions about themselves and towards others will likely result in having a similar posture. You see, our perceptions of God, what God is like, what moves the heart of God, his attributes, his character, it shapes the type of people that we become. And so the question then is, well, what comes to your minds when you think about God? And in view of whatever might come to your mind, how can we be sure that our perception is actually right? Or are we making an assumption that is out of alignment with who God really is? You see, one of the great gifts of the Bible is that it illuminates a clear and consistent picture of what God is like. And that can affirm or correct the perception that we might already have of God. And some of the most striking pictures of God were actually provided by Jesus. And so today we're going to be looking at a particular moment where Jesus gives this vivid picture of what God is like. It's a picture that reveals God's general posture towards people, particularly those who seem the most distant towards him. And as we consider what this picture of God tells us about what God is like, we'll consider what that means for us and the opportunity that we might have to respond in turn. And so if you've got a Bible with you, I'll get you to head to Luke chapter 15. That's where we're going to be camped out in today. As you head there, at this point of Jesus' life, one of the things that's become really clear is that wherever Jesus went, the crowd that followed was definitely a really diverse group. There was religious leaders and the poor. There were cultural elites and those who were marginalized by that exact same culture. There were women and men and children, all sorts of different people from the different circles across the spectrum of their society. And all of them seemed drawn in a compelling way to Jesus and what he said and what he did. Because Jesus claimed to be God. And Jesus presented a very different picture or understanding to what many assumed God was like. And it wasn't just what Jesus said, but also the way in which he related to these very many different kinds of people. And it both stoked curiosity and it caused a lot of controversy. And all of this leads us to the opening scene at the beginning of Luke 15. Let's read together. Now, the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So we're presented with this really stark contrast at the start. Because Jesus seems quite open and welcoming to the people who appeared unlikely to want to have anything to do with God. But then the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, the professional Christians, they thought that God wanted nothing to do with sinners and those on the margins. And yet Jesus seemed to actively search for and associate with these kinds of people. In their context, as it continues to be in many parts of our own world today, who you associated with, and definitely whoever you chose to share a meal with, that signified the types of people that you supported, that you accepted, and that you yourself would identify with. And so because Jesus seemed to seek and associate with this wrong crowd, their conclusion was that Jesus clearly couldn't be who he said he was. And Jesus definitely couldn't represent what God's posture is like towards those types of people. So that's their critique of Jesus. But how will Jesus respond? How will Jesus defend and explain his reasons for doing everything that he does? And what do they reveal to us about what God is like? Well, this is how Jesus replies. Then Jesus told them this parable. It's one of the classic ways in which Jesus regularly responded to critique or questions of who he was and what he was about. Instead of engaging in a debate, Jesus instead leverages the power of story to invite people in to begin to think a little differently. And he uses story to help people experience and discover a really important truth. Jesus doesn't just tell one story, though, he tells three, connected together and told in sequence to reveal a life-changing picture of what God is like. And so speaking to a crowd comprised of a whole bunch of different kinds of people, Jesus tells the story. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I've found my lost sheep." I tell you, that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who do not need to repent. Do you notice how from the get-go there's an invitation for those who are listening in to walk in the shoes of the characters that are featured in the story? Suppose one of you loses something of great value. And so you begin a sustained process of searching for what was lost. And when you finally find it and recover it, you experience that feeling of joy that can only be expressed in celebration with other people. Well, Jesus says that happens in heaven every single time someone turns back to God. This is God's love for the lost. Jesus then follows up with another story to build on this one that he's just told. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. It's the same story with a few minor changes to the setting and the characters involved. Both the shepherd and the woman, they seek what is lost until it's found because of the great value that what's lost has to them. And the joy of finding and recovering what was lost, it can only be celebrated properly in the presence of other people. In the same way, Jesus says, heaven celebrates every single time someone turns back to God. Now, can you imagine the impact that those first two stories might have had on those who were listening? Particularly those who only moments earlier had been described as sinners by the Pharisees and teachers of the law. How might they have felt hearing these stories that reveal God's love for the lost? That God in his love not only wants them back, but will go to great lengths to find them, bring them back, and then celebrate every single time. You know, I find a comforting beauty about the way in which Jesus uses the term lost to describe people far from God. It's one of the most relatable ways to describe someone who's not where they could or should be in relation to God. And I think that's because all of us knows what it feels like to be lost in one way or another, don't we? Like a child who's lost sight of their parents in a busy crowd, we know what it feels like to be lost when we're not where we're meant to be or who we're meant to be with. But then we also know that overwhelming response of emotion and experience for both a kid and their parent when the lost get found. That's a longing that every person deep down can relate to, and I think we deeply ache and hope for. Which is why Jesus tells a third story. But instead of a lost sheep or a lost coin, this story features a lost person. Jesus continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. The younger son's request at this point is unbelievably offensive. He's essentially saying to his father, "I wish you were dead, but because you're not, can I at least get my inheritance from you now?" And perhaps even more shocking than the son's outrageous request is his father's response, because the father grants his younger son what he demands and then allows the son to go his own way. And so this is the way that the son went. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And so after going all out in the search for a good time, and then quickly realizing that it never lasts for a long time, the son has hit rock bottom. And the people who first heard Jesus shared up to this point in this story, they are unlikely to have had any sympathy whatsoever for this young fella. They're thinking, in view of what he's done, this son deserves everything that's happening to him. He's lost his resources and his relationships because of his choices. He's experiencing deep shame because of his choices. But then it's at this point, fully aware of how much he's lost his way, that the young son's thoughts return to his father. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And so he got up and he went to his father." Now, I don't know about you, but in my mind, I've always wondered what it means when it says that this son came to his senses. I wonder, is this true remorse? Or is this just another sneaky plan from the son to avoid the consequences of his actions? I wonder, is his rehearsed speech a genuine admission of his faults? Or is it an attempt at manipulating his father into taking him back, even if it might involve a demotion in his life? That's what I wonder. But we're never told the true motives of the son, because that's not the point of the story that Jesus is telling. That's revealed through what happens next. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And so they began to celebrate. While the motives of the son are unclear, the heart of the father is not. His immediate and overwhelming and extravagant response makes this abundantly clear. And it begs the question, how often had the father looked towards the horizon, searching in hope for sight of his son? The fact that he sees his son from a distance gives some insight into this long-awaited hope that's finally becoming realized. And his response upon finding the son is a deeply emotional one. See, when it says that the father was filled with compassion, it describes that feeling that we can relate to it as well. When you are so deeply moved within that it compels you to make a move yourself. You can't just stay where you are. You're compelled to move. And so, moved by his compassion for his son, the father moves towards his son in stunning ways. Instead of walking, he runs. Instead of maintaining a respectable distance, he fully embraces his son. And the son doesn't even get to finish his well-rehearsed speech where he says sorry. Immediately after saying that he's not worthy to be called a son, the father cuts in, takes all the steps to instantly reinstate this young man into the family. A new robe, a ring and some shoes, a no expenses spared feast to celebrate with others this son who was lost but is now found again. So moved by compassion, the father moves towards his son. There's a guy called Tom Wright who summarized the meaning of these stories for us all with these words. Here, we have as vivid a picture as anywhere in Jesus' teaching of what God's love is like. It's a love that looks like a shepherd leaving 99 sheep in order to search for the one that's lost. It's a love that looks like a woman searching her entire home for the one coin that's yet to be found. It's a love that looks like a father welcoming home and embracing his son who once was lost and has now been found again. This is what God's love looks like for all who are lost. And this is great news for everyone. But let's not forget the reason that Jesus told these stories in the first place. Because remember, these stories are his response to the criticism of the religious group. Criticism which showed not just a misunderstanding or an assumption about God's heart, but it also revealed the nature of their own. And it's why Jesus saves the last part of the parable of this story to shine a spotlight on the other son, the older son, the son who had been there all along. Meanwhile, the elder son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The elder brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this young son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him?" Do you notice what the older son's anger and criticism towards his father and younger brother reveals? You know, there's got to be something said about the motivations and the perspective that seems to have driven this older son's sense of duty and obedience to his father. And unfortunately, it shaped his relationship with his father with some pretty serious consequences. It's interesting that the older son distances himself from the family. He never addresses his father as father or the younger brother as his brother. But the crux of it all becomes clear that the older son's heart is so distant or at odds with his father's. And because of the posture of his heart, this older son has lost the perspective to see the incredible thing that's happening before his very eyes, which is the main issue for him. He can't see, or he's unwilling or unable to participate in what is happening before him. And that's the point that's made by the father in the final provocative words of this story. "My son," the father said, "you are always with me and everything I have is yours, but we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And that's it. It's an open-ended conclusion to a story, and it intentionally finishes that way for a reason. It ends with the father reiterating his love for the lost, and it invites the older brother in to experience a change of heart for himself. A change of heart that's so moved by the father's love for the lost that it moves the older son towards a similar kind of love. Towards a love that not only searches for those who are lost, but is willing to receive when the lost return and extravagantly celebrates every single time the lost are found. Jesus told all three of these stories to illustrate and reveal what God's love is like. How God's love for the lost moves him to take extraordinary steps so that the lost might be found. But these stories also offer an invitation, and they provide a challenge for everyone who hears it. To the crowd of different people who first heard Jesus tell these stories, they had an opportunity to consider for themselves how God's love for the lost might be moving their own hearts towards a response. And the same opportunity exists for us here this morning. How might God's love for the lost be moving my heart towards a response? It's important to recognize that, like the different people in the crowd, there's a whole lot of differences here in the room. And so it's important to recognize that there can be more than one response to this question. For some of us here today, God's love for the lost might be moving your heart right in this moment to acknowledge that you've lost your way, but you want to come back to God. Whatever it is that you may have done, whatever your choices or the choices of others have led you up into this moment in life, maybe today you're discovering for the first time, or maybe remembering for the first time in a long time, the love that God has for you and how his desire is that you might be found in his love. How might God's love for the lost be moving your heart towards a response? Or perhaps for others of us, perhaps God's love for the lost is moving your heart towards some of the people in your life. Someone, and we all know someone, who is currently lost. And your desire, like God's, is that they would be found in his love again. It might be a spouse, a sibling, a son or a daughter, a mate, a neighbour or a colleague. How might God's love for the lost be moving your heart towards a response? And for some of you, perhaps God's love for the lost might be moving your heart towards those who are yet to have the opportunity to hear about or respond to the love that God has for them. Your heart might be being moved towards a particular group of people, a marginalised or minority group in our neighbourhoods or in our city or in our country, or maybe to a people in a completely other country. How might God's love for the lost be moving your hearts towards a response? Now, over the next few weeks in this series, we're going to explore a little more about how God's love for the lost is a beautiful gift that we experience ourselves and also can share with others. But today I want to offer some words that we can pray to begin a conversation that I hope will continue throughout the course of this series and beyond. And it's a conversation with God about the ways in which his love might prompt us to begin to take some actual practical steps in response. And it's a conversation that can begin or continue with a simple prayer like this: God, may your love for the lost move my heart towards. And it's deliberately open-ended to allow each of us to discern what it is that God might be actually leading you to do next. And so today, if you've realised that you've lost your way, but you want to come back to God, then perhaps your prayer could be something like this: God, may your love for the lost lead my heart towards you. I want to come back to you, God, and be found again in your love. It's a prayer that might signal that desire for you to return and to experience, like the younger son, the extravagant love that the Father has for you. And if that's your prayer today, I'd love to encourage you to let someone know about that. We'll have opportunities to do that at the end of the service. Or maybe there's someone in your life who has lost their way or has distanced themselves from God, and their name or their face is at the forefront of your mind in this time right now. It weighs heavy on your heart. And so if that describes you, then what if you were to insert their name into this prayer? God, may your love for the lost lead my heart towards Reese, or towards Mia, or towards Dave. Commit to pray for them every day this week. And just lean in anticipation at what could happen next. Or maybe God's placed a particular group of people or a country on your heart. And you might, as Josh and Elise were sharing earlier in that video, you might be sensing maybe at the beginnings of a call to go, a call to move, a call to get involved in God's search for the lost in a different country or culture or place to where you currently are. And if that describes you, then you could insert that people group or country into this prayer. God, may your love for the lost move my heart towards this group of people or this country. And so here's what I want to ask you to do this week. I want to ask you to pray this prayer or a variation of it every day for the next 7 days. God, may your heart for the lost move my heart towards. Maybe you write it down on a post-it note and put it on the bathroom mirror or at the front door or in your car, some place where you will see it every day. And when you see it, you'll be prompted to pray, God, may your love for the lost move my heart towards. I can see a few phones getting out, taking screenshots. And so we've also created a screensaver that you can download and put it on your lock screen so that when you, like on average, touch your phones 2,000 times a day, maybe once you'll be prompted to pray. God, may your love for the lost move my heart towards. Just head to our Connect link, download it, do the thing so it appears on your screen. Can you imagine every time that we pick up our phone, there's at least a visual prompt to remind us to pray? If we do this, watch and see what God could do in response to our prayers. And so as we pray, and as God moves your heart towards the lost in our world, let's consider what is it that God might be inviting us to do next. And we'll unpack that over the next 3 weeks of this series. But how about we begin asking God together right now? Let's close and pray. God, it can be a little overwhelming when we hear or experience what your love is like, but we give you thanks for it and we don't want to cheapen it or forget it. And so, God, as we reflect on your heart for those who are lost, and we recognize that being lost is something that we still become ourselves, would you move our heart towards response? God, move our hearts towards you. When we wander away from you, help us turn back to you and be found again in your love. And God, would you move our hearts towards others too? Would you bring to our mind, even in this time, the name of someone we know, or a group of people, or even a country of people that you're moving our hearts towards? God, these are people that you love, and we desire to love them like you do. So as you move our hearts towards them, would you give us the courage to follow through on what we sense you leading us to do? That through us, the lost might be found again to you. And it's in the name of Jesus that we pray. Amen.